session. A couple of quick announcements. Apparently there are people trying to watch us on the webcast and we are not loud enough for them to hear everything that we are saying, so we could raise our volumes a little bit.
Yep.
So on to agenda item 14. It's the update and possible action on children's vision and mobile clinic workshops. I'll hand that over to Rachel. I'm sorry, first Joe.
I'll go ahead and start. So we're going to start with children's vision. This is based off SB 402 that Senator Mitchell had last year. With this bill, we're looking at doing another approach. We have a work group meeting set for September 22nd at the Capitol. The interested parties have been sent out an email giving them the heads up. We are currently working on an agenda for the meeting so we can get interested people on the same page and figure out what the parties are thinking and what they would like to see. We are working with board members to progress this forward. Is there anything else to add?
No, I think our plan is to have the work group meeting in September. We will have then draft language for the board at the November board meeting for approval so that we can start shopping the language to legislators in December when they're sworn in, after they're sworn in. We are working on some other strategies, and I know at some point are going to ask every board member to take on a role in terms of promoting and advocating for the bill, particularly to their own legislators, so that we can really have a comprehensive approach to trying to get this through. So I think we had some meetings yesterday. I think Dr. Kawaguchi and Joanne and I have a strategic plan we're working towards that we'll share with the board in November. I don't know, Dr. Kawaguchi.
Yeah, it's just that it's always had unanimous support of the board. We're looking forward to that again, but more involvement so that we can show what it means to us, what it means to the children of California. And we'll try to do our best to make it easy for you to connect with your legislator so that it's as painless as possible.
Hopefully we'll find a time. Okay. Moving on to mobile clinics. I'm actually going to be looking for the board's opinion on this. With the children's vision, we know a direction that we're looking in. Mobile clinics is much more complicated. So I would actually look for board members and what your opinion is on what direction to go. So we're actually looking for legislation also because this is a weird gray area of the law, so it needs to be addressed. But what are your thoughts?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I would recommend that we have a Leg-Reg committee meeting before the next board meeting so we could vet some ideas among that committee and then have a broader discussion about it at the next board meeting, just because I know that some people have flights and all that. I don't know if now's the time to kind of open up that Pandora's box. Maybe we can hash out some of the details. Again, I think on this bill, ideally we would then at the January meeting, we need to have draft language, right?
We could do a spot bill.
Okay.
So we could do a spot bill introduction, and that would
okay.
give us an extra about a month.
Okay. So then that still works in the timing of then having a full board meeting in January and having the proposed language in January that the board can vote on. So I think that's a better way to go, because I think there's a lot of issues around mobile clinics, and given the time constraints, I want to make sure we have plenty of time to have a discussion. I would suggest maybe next time putting it, towards the beginning of the agenda so we have plenty of time to discuss, and that way, we can have a really good discussion about it. But I do think we'll call a Leg-Reg committee, at least get some parameters about what some of the board is thinking before the November meeting.
If board members wanted to go to that meeting, are we encouraged to not attend committee meetings? Or if we do attend, are we attending solely as members of the public?
It depends. If we have a committee meeting and enough members attend, then all of a sudden we have a quorum of the board present, then those that are attending, that are not part of the committee, may only attend as observers.
So you can have up to 5 people though on a committee, correct? Because
Yes.
6 is the majority.
Correct, so the problem being, whenever you get a quorum, then you have essentially a board meeting and
Yeah.
not a committee meeting. So, like I said, that's the rule.
Would it help if we advise Jessica if we are planning to attend a committee meeting that we're not on? So then you know if you've got, for this, Kurt, we're addressing your concern?
Certainly, any amount of pre-planning would be advantageous. Certainly not trying to dissuade the board members from coming. It's just a little bit of logistical / Open Meeting
Right.
Act concern we have to be aware of. So I would never want to, like I said, dissuade members from attending.
It'll still be noticed regardless, right?
Yeah.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
The committee has 4 people on it, so it has to be noticed. no matter what.
With work groups, though, that is slightly different because the work groups are 2 people. So if we get another person, then we had to follow all of the notice requirements. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
That's why I said lead-reg committee, because I figured other people would want to come.
Any other comments on either? Any public comments?
Kara Corches on behalf of the California Optometric Association. Just want to commend the board on taking a leading role on children's vision in California. Really looking forward to working with you hand in hand next year. This is such an important public health issue, and so very excited that you will be moving ahead with this bill. And regarding the mobile clinics, just encourage you to involve all the stakeholders because this is a very complex issue. So involving different groups from the beginning, hopefully work out a lot of the kinks that we experienced in the last legislative session.
Moving on to, I have a question. If we have some time at the end, then we might. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, that's fine.
So let's go through to agenda item 15. Joanne?
This is also me. Just to give you a heads up on the process with the regulations, what it has to go through. So once we get approved language from the board for the regulation, then it's prepared to be noticed. It has to be noticed for 45 days to the public. The notice includes sending out to interested parties, posting it on the website. At the end of the 45 days, we then have a hearing. If there's any changes to those language, they have to be sent out for 15 days. And all those approvals have to go through the board. So it is a fairly lengthy process. And then it has to go through DCA for approval, and then actually apply that to the Bureau, and then it has to go to OAL. So the rulemaking packets have a deadline of a year, and then DCA actually has the ability to extend that. So to get one of these through the process, it's going to be about a year to get it done. So heads up on those. So looking at the first one, A, so this is the unprofessional conduct amendment. This one originally went through and was disapproved by OAL. The amendments have been made, approved by the board, have been noticed. This packet is actually currently at DCA, giving their approval again for it. It'll then go up to the Bureau and then be resubmitted to OAL. The next one we're looking at, this one is being worked on right now. It's actually just got through DCA for their review before it's being posted. So it's due to be posted probably in, I think it's the next 2 weeks, and then the hearing for that is going to be on October 31st.
This is B.
This is B. So what this one is, this is the backup just in case the bill doesn't go through. In statute right now, the cap of the RDO fee is at $100. It was being charged 75 in regulation. Statutory cap brings it up to 100. This regulation would bring it up to that statutory cap. Next one we're looking at is C. This one is in process. It has not been noticed yet. D is the CE courses that have been referenced earlier. That one has gone to DCA to be approved. It has been gone through DCA, is at the Bureau now. Its due date is September, I believe 23rd. We should make that date. OAL then has It's 30 working days, which ends up to be about 45 days, that we'll hear back from them of whether or not it's approved or disapproved. And then regulations go into effect quarterly. I'm hoping this one will make the January 1st effective date. If Jessica wants to bring that up, there's a proposed revision.
So we don't have that proposed revision for you today, but that has to do with the requirement for co-locations. As you all know, we requested assistance from the governor's office, which made it into the trailer bill, to also require the RDOs to report the co-location, not just the optometrists. So now that that's effective, we're going to have to make a few tweaks to the approved regulations that the board approved at a prior meeting, and also the forms. So once those revisions are done, we'll bring them to the board by November.
F and G, delegation of functions and qualifications for foreign crowds, are both being processed right now for notification. The next one, H, certificate posting. I'm working on getting the notice ready. The notice has also gone to DCA for their quick review. Haven't got that back yet. I'm hoping for the beginning of November to have that hearing. So the end of the 45-day period will be at the beginning of November.
Is this the one level of licensure?
Yes.
Looking at I and J, this is going to be the same thing. We're working on posting them for notification. So then the notice is your initial statement of reasons and your justifications and such. That's the meat and potatoes of what your regulation is going to be.
One clarification, J is actually a new language that the board hasn't seen yet, where we have a statute that says that the board shall accredit schools, but the board doesn't actually accredit the schools. We turn that over to and I get the acronym, it's the Accreditation Council of Optometric Education. It's the only accreditation council in the nation. All other licensing boards are using it. We've always used it, but we don't have, it's not necessarily complying with existing laws. So the proposed regulation language is before you, so we would like to, upon review, have the board make a motion to approve the language so we can start the rulemaking process. And again, this isn't uncommon for other boards. A lot of other boards do have the statute requiring them to accredit the schools, but they also have the corresponding regulation. Those who don't generally would accredit their own schools. I think acupuncture is one of them. They do their own accreditation. We don't, and so we just want to make sure that everything is good.
Question, Jessica, on this one, so BMP already has what's stated as this is the board's responsibility, right? And so there's no way then that we'd be responsible for any applications that have come in that are sitting or in review or what have you prior to this going through? Are there any?
I don't believe so. I think this is
Okay.
more kind of a bring it into conformity, kind of codify what we do now.
Okay.
More of an approach. I just think it's something that's has been, for whatever reason, just kind of left dormant.
Okay.
So it just sort of catches up to where we need to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not perceived as not doing it.
Understood.
Yeah.
One thing I would also like to add, and just in general for all of these rulemaking packets, as you can see, there's quite a bit of work that Joanne is doing for us right now. We also have another laundry list on my whiteboard in my office of more language that's going to come before the board. But what I'm trying to do is now kind of, as long as we're addressing anything that's making us compliant with the laws, those are my priority. But if there's ever anything else that you feel we should increase the priority on and push through faster, please let us know. But just know that more is coming as well.
So this one requires an action.
Yes.
Also move. Second.
The motion, just for clarification, the motion would be to approve this language and direct staff to commence a rulemaking process.
Correct. And circulate the language for the required time period.
Yes. One clause ahead of me, Ms.
No problem.
Who seconded it?
Donna.
Thank you.
Any further discussion from the board? Any public comment?
Aye.
Dr. McIntyre?
Aye.
Rachel?
Aye.
Dr. Wong?
Aye.
Dr. Schultz?
Aye.
I vote aye. Dr. Kelly?
Aye.
Ruby?
Aye.
Sid?
Aye.
Dawn?
Aye.
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 Motion passes.
Thank you, members.
That takes us to agenda item 16.
So this is an update from the prior board discussion. At that discussion, the board wanted to direct staff to move forward with legislation to require all optometrists to become TPA certified. But the board first directed us to do some research to find out if it could be done via regulation. The requirements that they would have to do is pretty extensive, and it's set through by statute, and we wouldn't be able to do what the board had asked through regulation. With that, we also wanted to clarify the difference between the standard of care and the scope of practice, being that those who are currently practicing with either no certification or a DPA certification, they are practicing within their scope and they are doing so legally. And as long as they're within their scope, they're within the standard of your scope of practice. So they're not breaking any laws. They are saying they're practicing within what they're allowed to do and what the board had set out the requirements for them to practice within that scope. So the numbers as previously reported, I think we had, we had 557 licensed optometrists who had DPA certification and 85 who had no certification. That number today continues to drop. We now have 486 DPA licensed optometrists and 69 with no certification. So we do anticipate this to continually decrease over time. So now
So
we
what are
just
the
want
numbers again?
486
and 69.
and 69.
It's a total of 555.
You do not care.
Haircut.
I just thought I remember that number, and I'm like.
So what we request is that the board consider the additional information provided, decide whether or not they want to maintain the position and proceed with legislation, or if they would like us to take a different route.
I just wanted to point out, I checked, and there are no schools in the state of California that are currently offering a TPA certification course. I spoke with the person at UC Berkeley, and she says that she's only aware of one course right now, and that's at Nova Southeastern, so it's the school in Florida, and they administer the test once a year.
But if you ask the schools of optometry in California as to why, it's just they don't get, it's like the rush is over to advance your license, so they just don't.
That's all a moot point right now because we did adopt a regulation where you can essentially self-train through continuing education. You can do this on your own. The only tough part is that you have to go and take the test in North Carolina, but you don't need the class. It can all be done online and by doing your own preceptorships with an optometrist or an ophthalmologist.
And you have to physically go to North Carolina
Yeah.
to take it online.
Yeah.
All the
That's the
tests.
testing center.
No, to clarify, I apologize. They don't actually have to do the North Carolina part. They have to pass TMOD, and that's part of part 2 of the national exam, and so that's offered all throughout California.
Oh, it is.
Oh.
So they don't even have to go to North Carolina. That was one of the big stinks that we had heard from one of the public members was that you're forcing people to go to North Carolina. Now that's been taken out of the mix.
But I thought the TMOD was.
It's part of it.
It's part of the test, but is it its own individual test? It's still.
You can either do it as take all of part 2 or
it's
take
just that one part
TMOD
two.
separately.
All right, so I opened this can of worms a couple of times. Here's my rationale, here's my thought. So we've got 60 some odd ODs with no certification at all. And you're saying that's meeting scope of practice, which probably is for their license, but it is not meeting standard of care by any measure. If that person sees a patient who is a diabetic, who's a high myope, who's had any type of facial trauma, that requires that there's a dilated fundus exam performed. And that person cannot legally perform a dilated fundus exam. So there's no way that that person can meet the current standard of care. Now granted, by the time this legislation is, if there was legislation made, probably those 60 some odd people would no longer be practicing, because these are folks that have been in practice for 40 years or more at this point. So that might, just through attrition, take care of itself. The larger group, the 400 plus that have DPA certification, I personally don't think that they currently can meet the standard of care. They can work within their scope, but they can't meet the standard of care. And here's my rationale for that. When the TPA law was passed in 1990? 92? 92. When the early 90s. When the TPA law was passed, it clarified a number of things that optometrists had been doing and now can legally do. For instance, you come into my office and you say, you know, gee, my eyes are really dry in the morning. And I say, okay, and I give you some lubricating eye drops. Put these in your eyes. If I have a DPA certification, I cannot make that recommendation to you, even though it is over the counter. If I have itchy eyes, or a patient has itchy eyes, I cannot tell them to go get some Benadryl. I can if I have a TPA certification, not if I have a DPA. In fitting contact lenses, the standard of care for a contact lens patient has evolved drastically in the last 20 years with better understanding of tear production, meibomian gland dysfunction, dry eyes, which might not even be a real condition anymore because there's other things causing it. And if you have even a minor type of problem that can cause contact lens rejection or the inability to wear contact lenses, it's something that can be easily treated in some cases by expressing impacted meibomian glands, by putting warm compresses on and just sort of rubbing your eyes, taking omega-3 supplements, maybe using lubricating drops, all over-the-counter type stuff, nothing special. If I have DPA certification, I cannot give you that information, and I cannot, with the standard that exists today, fit a contact lens the way of somebody with a TPA certification can. So I don't think that, I think if you're missing the TPA certification, you plain and simple cannot practice optometry in 2016 to the level that you should be able to fulfill your duty to a patient. Doesn't mean scope of practice. I went to my dentist to have a tooth extracted, and she said, I don't like where that is, I'm going to send you to an oral surgeon. That's fine. She didn't feel comfortable doing it, but she was licensed to do it if she needed to. If an optometrist has TPA certification and there's an infection or an allergy or something and he or she doesn't want to take care of it, great, refer the person out. But you've got the knowledge and you've got the certification to make that diagnosis and make that referral properly. Anybody with a DPA or without certification just doesn't meet the standards anymore based on what's in the law. That's all.
I can counter that just a little bit. Say I have a patient in my chair, poor vision, I'm DPA, TPA certified, I dilate that person, they've got cataracts. I can make a recommendation that they go have their cataracts removed.
Correct.
But that doesn't mean I need to be licensed to do that or have that within my scope of practice to be able to make that recommendation. I just have to know enough to make that referral.
Right.
So how does that differ from saying what you just said?
Okay, so if you were going to fit a contact lens patient, you would go through all of the, you check tears and you do everything that you would normally do to check a contact lens patient. And you think, gee, this person doesn't have great tear quality. Are you going to tell that person, I'm not going to fit you with contact lenses, I'm going to refer you down the street to the other optometrist who has a license where he or she can actually tell you to take lubricating drops and fish oil and fit those contacts?
It might be the prudent thing to do, whether it's done or not.
But is that providing the care for the consumer that they're expecting? So if I went to Dr. Turetsky,
Which would
and
be a
I
good
have
move.
dry eyes. And you're
He's in
only
nursing homes, don't stay
DPA,
there.
you don't have your TPA. I have dry eyes. What are you going to tell me?
I'm going to tell you to go to Walgreens and pick up some lubricating eye drops.
No,
And
if you
I'll-
don't, if you're not TPA, sir.
I'm going to tell you to go to Walgreens and pick up lubricating eye drops and take some fish oils and do eyelid scrubs. It's all over the counter stuff, but I legally cannot tell you to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway because I'm not going to lose you as a patient because I can't tell you to buy an over-the-counter eye drop.
So if I have a reaction to it, can I come back and take repercussions against you?
Of course you can.
Theoretically, yeah, I've practiced.
So then why-
Just practicing outside of the
Yeah,
scope
so
of
then
practice.
why not, if you have a DPA license, and we know now, how long would it take to get the TPA, do you think?
As fast as probably 8 months, maybe a year. I mean, when I took my TPA, it was a regular old coursework and a test, took about, and I had to do the preceptorship, I think it was about 5 or 6 months. That was in 1996.
But there's a preceptorship. Well,
Yeah.
you said it's
65
hours.
hours.
65 hours. So this part right here talks about like how,
Because you have
it's
to-
pretty extensive.
You have to, so if someone has just a DPA, right, those people are all going to be people who graduated a long time ago, so they're going to have to study for this test to do it. So I can't imagine that they're ready and willing to go, let's say it's in October, I don't know when the next, TMOD is, but, so they've got to study for the test, they've got to pass the test, and then they've got to do the 65-hour, it takes time. It's going to, because you've got to.
Well, this isn't going to happen tomorrow, but I would say that within the next, 7 years, so people know, okay, 5 years, 7 years down the road, I'm not going to be able to renew my optometry license. I have this large bank of time that I can use to self-administer a test, take the TMOD, and do my preceptorship. You could do all that in a year pretty easily. Yeah.
Like a year to 2 years, I would say.
2 years. So if we give somebody 5 years, by then the non-certified folks will probably have retired anyway.
So I get the point that you can. However, I think we also have to face the reality that there may be practitioners that don't want to. So if we are going to force a hand, it could be seen as creating, what's the word for it? Business, I just lost it.
Anti-competitive?
Anti-competitive, that we could be doing that. I am fully certified, but to Deborah's point, although I'm fully certified at this particular moment in time, I am not diagnosing and treating glaucoma, even though I'm certified to do that. That doesn't mean that my patients are not getting quality of care ultimately, because I have other doctors that I work with, and I send the patient on. I explain to them, so they do ultimately get the quality of care that they need. One other thing that I'm a little worried about, we're having discussion about, because in my personal opinion, it's a moving target sometimes, is standard of care. So you mentioned standard of care a lot, and I definitely understand that that is an important factor that we're faced with. However, it is always moving. And is it within our realm as a board to be determining what is standard of care through regulation that's going to stay in place for a while versus managing the scope of care that's been established through law and regulation? Is that more of our responsibility? So those are just some questions that I wanted to pose to see if somebody had.
The other comment is the attrition comment, right? So 5 years, 7 years, the numbers, this number dropped in what time period, months?
A matter of months, a few months.
So, I mean, I agree with what you're saying in theory, just because I think I have a TLG license, I practice all of it, right? And I appreciate that when I work in a hospital, so
Right.
if you work in a hospital, you're gonna have to do that kind of stuff. Patients come to me, they expect it. I deliver the care, so I understand what you're saying. But I do see the points that are valid on this side as well, because it's just, the force a hand comment. You're forcing somebody to do something that,
And I'm not necessarily right. I just have, this is just my thought on it as, and again, looking out as a public as a public board? You know, are we
I-
watching out for the best interests of the consumers in the state by letting folks who are practicing optometry from 30 or 40 years ago, or are we doing the state member or the public members a favor by letting those folks continue to practice at that level?
I mean, if they're offering the appropriate referrals in a timely manner, I think that's something to consider as well. Ideally, like in my brain, in the ideal optometry world, everybody would have a TLG license and they would be practicing and they would be doing, but that's just not going to happen to some. So yes, I want public members to have, patients have to have access to healthcare.
Right.
They have to have access to good healthcare, proper healthcare. That's why you roll into optometrists to provide that. I don't know how forcing someone to get something that they're not comfortable with potentially is going to, I don't know how it's going to help. Because now you have the TPA license, right? But you don't.
But they might still practice according to how they practiced when they had
40
their
years
DPA
ago.
license.
So,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, okay, question for Jessica or for Kurt. Is there, because I don't even know anybody that just has a DPA at this point, but I'm sure that if I had a DPA and somebody came in with a dry eye, I'd give them some lubricating drops. Again, something I cannot do under the regulations. Is it within the board's ability to send out a letter, a notice, an informational thing to all optometrists or to those with DPAs or no certification saying, by the way, you don't have you only have a DPA. Please review, maybe just 3041, you send them that. These are the state laws that pertain to your level of licensure, with an FAQ as what they can and can't do as an optometrist without a TPA. See what I'm saying? So like you cannot give your patient lubricants if you think they have a dry eye. You have to you need to refer them.
We do FAQs and reminders. We have done advertising reminders too.
But this is a direct mail to the folks that you have that only have DPAs or no certification.
And we can do that. But I would just caution not to jump to assuming that they're all not already following the law, because we don't have any.
I don't think he's making that assumption. I think he wants to ensure that there's
That they know.
the proper standard is delivered. So I think
That's why all of us that, I mean, anyone here that's that old, that's why I was one of the first classes that could actually use diagnostics. When I got into school, you couldn't dilate an eye. That's why I took the classes, and that's why I took a glaucoma certification, so you can keep up with what's going on, even if I'm not going to use it. And things have changed over the last 30 years in this profession. And if you're not willing to keep up, I don't think you're doing your patients a service. Unless you're going to be honest with them and say, I can't treat this, I can't diagnose this, I want to refer you to somebody who can.
Yeah, and that actually is one of the reasons I agree with what you said, is because I don't know that everybody does do that. But, for the reason that you mentioned. Mark, you had a comment on that.
Yeah, of course I have a comment.
It's fine.
So from what I hear from the report is, if we were to proceed on this, it's going to be a big hill. It has to go through the legislature, and we have limited legislative resources here. We're talking about determining the standard of care. That sounds like a big decision, either here or in the legislature, that frankly I need more evidence or information on. It's analogous to the State Bar of California telling all its lawyers have to have a certification in trust in estates law, or you are not qualified to practice law in California. I mean, my immediate reaction to that is, I don't do trust in estates law. Why do I have to have this certification? And the answer is, well, you're hurting the public if you don't have the certification. I mean, that's, as a public member, that's a big decision for me. I need to hear from someone else, I mean, some OD school professor or someone to say, if you don't have the certification, you are hurting the public. It's below the minimum requirement to practice optometry. Is this a problem that's going to solve itself?
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually, right. So considering our legislative resources. Finally, I am concerned about the patients. Some folks are going to say, heck with it, I'm not going to do it. Where do those patients go, right? We're kind of, where do they go? I mean, we have to take that into consideration too.
I want to comment on that because my first question is, are we causing harm? If the consumer is harmed, then we need to do something. As far as your analogy with law, to me, having to do with state and wills is different if it's dry eyes. I mean, I know a lot of people that have teary eyes and dry eyes. My question is, if they're going to someone who is DPA certified and who is not legally supposed to treat them, are they making referrals and then that consumer is incurring an additional cost? Had they been able to go to another doctor who was TPA certified? There's a distinction for me in that.
Sure.
And that same individual, if it's access, they're still having to go to another eye doctor, one way or the other. But the bigger question for me is, are we causing harm? And if the consumer is being harmed, then to Glenn's question, Dr. Kawaguchi's question, are we determining via regulation or managing what has been established? If our job is to manage what has been established, then maybe we have to look at raising the bar.
Well,
But going back to what you said, I don't know enough. I do not know enough.
but I would argue it's not even about the cost, it's about the time.
That too.
Especially if they went to someone, now I've got to go to another person. I mean, I was told by my optometrist I have to go to an ophthalmologist because, and have I gone? No, because it's like, really? I've got to now call another doctor, I've got to, So, and I also think about it is, at one point, I thought we discussed something that had to be to explain all of the DPA, TPA in layman's terms.
That's what she was talking about with the posting.
Certification and regulations going
So,
through.
so I think that if we don't do anything at a minimum, whoever has a DPA license needs to very plainly display as soon as a patient walks in, I cannot, under my license, do, and here's a list. So that if I walk in there and see and say, okay, why can't a pharmacist, if I go into a pharmacist, could they tell me to get lubricating drops?
Yeah, they have.
So, I mean, in a way, I keep hearing it's more of a hardship on the optometrist.
Right.
I'm not hearing the hardship that this is causing on the patient. And to me, that's why we're here. And if one of these licensees does not want to do the due diligence to push themselves to get this kind of certification, then maybe it's time for them to retire. Because it's about the quality of care for the patient. And I get what you're saying on standard of care, but nowadays, if I went and sat down with an optometrist who said, I can't tell you, or I'm more worried about what are they telling them that we don't know. And then they're not following, they're breaking the law. So we're kind of saying, go ahead and break the law. And that's not what we're here for. And to the other point on legislation, and to Mark's, you're right. I'm looking at this going, okay, let's just add that to the list. But, maybe if we give it a shot and folks see that we're serious about this, maybe that will empower them and inspire them to actually move forward and take the classes that they need to take to get the TPA license.
So I'll just make one more quick comment about, that hasn't been discussed. I do worry with the 30 to 40-year-old practice that, you kept up your license. Like, I actually didn't have a glaucoma certification because it wasn't part of my graduating thing, but I got one. Just to keep the license current and to move forward. I worry if you don't do those things, then are you actually, so you call it dry eye, right? Let's say you are prescribing for dry eye and you call it dry eye. What are you missing? Because, people bandy that term around. And I'm glad you actually brought that example up because they bandy like it's no big deal. But that can actually have serious repercussions too, right? You can have corneal issues, you can have all kinds of things that can lead to damage. So I do agree with that. I just don't know.
But my whole thing to bring that one up specifically is that going all the way back to the non-certified optometrist, that person is allowed to fit contact lenses. But now fitting contact lenses properly does require an evaluation of the tear film, which DPA and non-certified can't do.
You have to flip the lid, right? You can't even diagnose.
Yeah.
That is true.
So basically,
I
it's
promise
just
to
a
last thing
remark.
I'll say.
You can say more. You can say more.
I mean, surprising Don and I are on the same page. I know we disagree on this particular issue, right? But I need more evidence, information that we are causing public harm, right? And if someone comes in and says, listen, people are getting hurt, I've only heard a couple doctors, and they're members of the board, and one public person who commented down in Los Angeles. That's all I've heard. In terms of, are we permitting violations of the law of people who are, only have limited certification and doing extra? Well, if that's the problem, it's our role to prosecute those folks or get information out there saying, don't do this or we're coming after you. I mean, that's our job.
Get the information out there, because I guarantee you, folks that have DPA don't know that they're not allowed to say, oh, you have dry eyes, here's some lubricants. They don't know it.
And I'm totally in agreement with you with that. We should do whatever we can to enforce the law.
I think that in itself, getting that information out is gonna cause some of these people to go get that certification. Because they're gonna be like, wow, I can't do very basic things. So that in and of itself is gonna raise the standard of care, hopefully, rather than going and regulating and legislating.
Maybe instead of pushing towards regulations or legislation, we do an education piece that goes out targeted to those people.
But again, you're talking about making it easier on the optometrist, not the public.
That's right.
So again, it goes to Donna's point, if a member of the public shows up, they don't know this. They don't understand all this stuff. They're gonna go in there thinking, I'm gonna get an eye exam. And if they go in there, and now they're being told, I'm sorry, you need to go down the street, or you need to go here, they're not, most of them, and we have this discussion with children's vision, that's one of the issues. People don't do the follow-up care that they need. So I get that it might be easier on the optometrist, but our job here is to make sure the public is protected. And I don't think that protects the public.
So I think a couple of things from all of, I think we start
That's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, we start with that, and then we can move forward, because you have to do the other thing anyway, and that there is, yes, that is helping the optometrist, but it also, if we inform them of those things, there may be people who do, because it's true, like I don't know anybody who is not sitting here as an optometrist who knows most of what's in here, even we don't know all of the, so they're not gonna know that, right? So I think that you do start with those steps, and then you move forward with that.
You have parallel things. I also think, though, I would push for that, the folks with just the DPA license need to publicly notice what they cannot do if you come in to see them for an eye exam.
The definitions are key. The definitions are key to what you can and can't do, because it's true, because patients are not gonna know.
And it has to be plainly written when you walk in, so people can understand.
But didn't we talk about that, because on the back of the licenses it says what a TPA or a DPA license,
Yeah.
but I thought it was,
But
if it was DPA, it only said what a DPA did, but it didn't have what a TPA or a TPLG would have.
I thought we were doing all, at one point we talked about.
Yeah, but
doing
we
all of
did.
them.
We get a paper that had every.
Yeah.
But then I thought we said it was too confusing for the public, so it was too much information, so then I thought we edited it back to just what each, if you had the TPA, then it would just say what the TPA.
I don't think it's a bad thing to say, because it's true, if you list every type of license on
Right,
it,
it's
people,
too much
you're swimming in
information.
information, so you can say, I am a such and such licensee, I have a TLG license, I can do blah, 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 and you can list it, because it's one definition then, right?
Yes.
And the person can just look and see, these are the things this doctor can do, so obviously this is okay. If you walk into someone who doesn't have a certification, I don't have a certified, I'm just I don't even know what that's called anymore, but just a non-certified optometrist, this is what I can do. I can refract.
I can think
But, you know, your point is still, I still think about your point about contacts, because they can fit contacts, and that's not the same thing as just throwing something in their eye. People kind of downplay what contact lenses are. And look on your face, you're like, yeah. And, I mean, there's a lot of damage you can do.
You can lose your eyesight, can't you?
You can if you don't do it, so. I think we start, and we just like, you know, kind of, it's like a,
I'd like us to outline exactly what the next steps are then, beyond just saying, we're gonna send a education piece. I really would like to,
okay.
So
because we're only talking about 69.
So let's start with, you said some very.
Well, what
good
I suggest
points.
is start with the low-hanging fruit, which is this. I would say there's no harm, we already said we were gonna do a Reg Committee meeting to talk about mobile clinics. Notice this on there as well. Let people come and, you know, send out a notice maybe to all of these folks and let them know we're gonna be having a committee to talk about it. Let's see what happens, and then, you know, maybe we'll do that before the November board meeting, and then we can bring it up again, you know, at the November board meeting to see what, you know, needs to happen. Because at least then but do what you suggested on sending out a notice, letting these people know, letting them know that maybe we can set a board meeting ahead of time so that when you do it all in one thing, and the board is going to be taking up this issue on such and such a date.
So I have a suggestion, since we have not yet had a meeting of the Consumer Protection Committee.
Oh, we could
This
do
sounds
that
like
one
a
too.
fabulous. Well, no, we
Don't I
Me and my big mouth.
Well, I'm just saying because somebody needs to come up with what this
That's fine.
notification says, right? So since we've not utilized that committee, I think that would be a perfect. That committee currently has Rachel, Mark, and Dr. McIntyre on it.
Perfect.
You know, so that works. If there's anyone else who wishes to participate, or you can just let us know, kind of thing. So that's a great project,
Okay,
all right, to get out. Well,
I'll participate.
okay.
that's fine.
Great.
It's fun. So Dr. Sharetsky, also now you have.
So maybe that group meets first, and then do you still want to do the Reg Committee then?
Yeah, I do. I
And
want to do
then
this
send it-
first because this is a little bit
first.
easier to do.
And this is just the letter.
Yeah, so
Right, yeah.
maybe you guys come up with something soon. The next, I don't know, a month is reasonable or not for you guys to have a
And then we
meeting,
have
but if
the
you
letters.
can. Because that actually like just pushes it forward, right? So you have one thing done, then you move on to, well, your thing has to wait.
Go for
But,
public notification.
but you just keep moving forward, and then you have the other meeting, and then we can go from there. But that at least starts the ball rolling
Okay.
in that direction. So you are currently the
That's
chair.
fine.
I'll leave it to you.
Okay.
If staff has any examples of something that, you know, basically says, if you're certified for this, you can only do X and Y, or, you know, it's some sort of,
It's probably, it's in there.
some sort of warning.
It lays out, it's,
But it's
Well,
like-
I-
it needs to be in one
Real people's language.
I mean, it might be nice to think about the table, right?
It's nice and
Non-certified,
pretty.
DPA, TPA, and then you can say, this is what a non-certified optometrist
No,
can
no,
do.
I'm just talking about the education piece that goes
Yes.
to the doctor.
Yes.
Right, no, that's what I'm
That's
saying,
a- and
as
that's a
opposed to
good
doing it
idea.
by word, just do it like in a table. Non-certified, DPA, TPA, so that the DPA people can say, oh, these are the only things I can do. And then there could even be a little like asterisk thing saying, remember, you can also not prescribe any over-the-counter meds, as in, you know, right, but, you know, but it could be somewhere in there, right? So I think more people are able to read like a table where you're comparing one group to another versus like paragraph form.
Yeah, the consumer.
Whatever you guys want to do, whatever you think will work most
Stand
effectively.
at the door and read.
Good
If
start.
staff finds any examples from what we've done before or from other jurisdictions, the committee would welcome.
I have one comment for the committee, since I wanted to have a meeting, but just be careful not to list, try to list what you cannot do, because then it's like opening Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Like, you can go on and on what they can't do. So usually it's what you can is gonna be much more important than
And
what you
with the-
assume.
And maybe with like a broad statement, if it's not on the list, like politely, if it's not on the list, you can't do it, so. Maybe stick figures, whatever it takes. So we finally get to use that committee. I know.
See, you said something earlier.
Yeah, you
You've
did.
opened Pandora's box.
Yes, let's get a motion on that. I need a motion that we task the committee, with the Consumer Protection Committee, with
developing of a table
An
or a
outline.
chart or something.
Notice.
How about public notice, a public notice of some kind?
Yes.
How about a professional notice? Would be-
Yeah,
no,
perfect.
it would be, because it's only gonna go to optometrists to
Licensing
say,
notice?
as a reminder, this is.
A notice to licensees regarding scope of practice for each category.
Scope
Well,
of practice based on certification.
Based on certification.
Can we,
How does that?
at least this stage,
No, we're trying to educate the licensees first, and move to the other steps, because the thing that we're trying to do with the regulations, that's the one that's going to go out to so public members can, so patients can see that.
so if I may request the board to just task us with this small little bite-sized piece regarding the DPA, TPA issue and not,
Every
Right now,
certification
this is
done.
what we're gonna send out to optometrists to let them know the
About the-
scope of practice.
about the DPA, TPA issue.
With a non-certified DPA.
Right.
How about that?
Yeah, yeah.
You don't want to get into everything. You can do all kinds of stuff.
There's only one more.
Actually, yeah,
But, well, there's TPG, TLG.
there's
I'm gonna send you a
there's
big
DPA, but non-certified DPA,
It's a
TPA,
weird attorney.
PG, and then the TPL, and
And
the
TLG.
TLG.
There's six.
And TOP.
Just for clarity,
Not one of them.
Come on, we got to.
TPL, TPG, TPLG, TLG.
There's no P.
That's TLG.
Oh, is it?
just for clarification,
This many.
it's not limited, the committee work isn't limited to just that one piece, right? You're looking at next steps overall.
Well, the next step then goes to the life reg committee.
Okay.
Recommendations to the legislature.
Okay.
Yes?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's what those committees
It's your
are.
committee.
So recommend to yourself, so chair and vote.
It'll be an easy conversation.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
So we're tasking the committee to come up with the acceptable practice, the scope of practice, right? Scope of practice, the acceptable scope of practice for
Notice.
Notice.
a notice to licensees for what's listed under a non-certified.
Regarding scope of practice in relation to certification.
I wanted to specify non-certified TPA and TPA because that's what you're asking for.
Yes.
To be distributed to licensees. Not all of them.
You lost me at TLP, MGB.
Every other.
ACC.
I know.
So do we get the gist of the motion? Shall I try again?
I got the gist of it.
I know you got the gist.
For the minutes.
For the minute.
For the minutes.
So you're developing scope of practice notice to licensees regarding non-certified DPA
And TPA. That was the motion. I need a motion to, can
So
someone?
moved.
Thank you. Can I
I'll
get a
second
second?
it.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Anybody from the public? Any comments?
I have an aversion from a legal standpoint, taking things to trial if any of this results in that. An aversion to the board identifying something as scope of practice or as the standard of practice. Because if any of these DPA individuals were to come before the court for any reason where we'd have to identify what their scope of practice or what their standard of practice is, we would specifically look to an expert to tell us, an individual with the certification, what would be within their scope of practice, what would be the standard of practice that they'd be deviating from. So it's just a term of art that I think is safer if things go the litigation route, to not be in that notice, even though essentially that is exactly what you're doing, but to keep that terminology out of it so that opposing attorneys aren't going to marry us to a certain scope of practice and possibly tie our hands during litigation of being able to pursue any kind of wrongful conduct on the part of those practitioners. So I know that in the board's statutes, there is a section that says, this is everything you can do. I don't know if it specifically says, this is your scope of practice. I think it's just safer not to call it that when sending these notices out to individuals.
I mean, you can make it as simple as this is what's allowed by,
This is what.
this is what is allowed for your particular category.
Review of regulations,
Right.
business and
Per
profession
regulations.
codes.
Yeah, I mean, you can even call it that, and just say, here's the business and profession code as it applies to your particular certification.
I think the committee, mindful of that comment, we hew very close to whatever the statute says or what the
Yeah,
regulation
yeah.
says.
When you asked, can you, it's right here. So,
Yeah, members, if I could, I think Ms. Crawford's points are taken. Given what we talked about earlier, I think the board should consider this to be an educational opportunity. I think in that framework, and I would also suggest that we sort of do it, if you have such certification, here's what the law authorizes you to do, and sort of like that. I don't, as your attorney, not your litigation counsel, I want to make sure that this cannot be viewed as punitive to those licensees who may have not elected to get the certification. It can
It's
be,
just information.
right, cannot be viewed as punitive, so.
Thank you for those.
But you will be there.
Well, you'll be
You
there.
will be there.
Yes.
Okay.
No, it's fine, it's a good idea.
On
Anita, you're invited to the meeting.
Oh, I see.
Your presence has been requested.
I think she learned to do cartwheel.
All right, any other comments from any board members? Any other further comments from members? No? All right, so I'll take a roll call vote. Mark?
I.
Aye. Rachel?
Aye.
Dr. Wong?
Aye.
Dr. Turetsky? Aye. Dr.
Aye.
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 Dawn?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Motion passes. Agenda item 17, I'm going over to Jessica.
So agenda item 17 is election of officers. Much like the process we followed last year, we sent out a nomination form, allowed for people to nominate for all of the offices, offices that are open. And right now, they're available for the president, the vice president, and the secretary. We provided an opportunity for any candidates to provide candidate statements. However, we are able to accept nominations from the floor, and candidate statements can also be made on the floor. So at this time, we've received nominations for president for Sid Brandbein, nominated by Dr. Turetsky, and Dr. Chawla, nominated by Dr. Wong. At this time, I'd like to call for any additional nominations from the floor. No additional nominations from the floor. So then I would like, since we just have two members, if I can go down and record the, no, actually before that, if the candidates want to make any additional candidate statements for the office of president. So at this time, since we received the nomination for Sid Brandbein first in the packet, I'd like to turn it over to Sid Brandbein if she would like to make any comments.
Yes, please, I would. Dr. Turetsky, thank you very much for the nomination. As a board, we are facing transformational issues over this coming year. Items such as reimagining of the strategic plan to align with our evolving board structure, executing an effective startup of the RDO Advisory Committee, and strongly advocating public protection through our actions as a unified public voice are all necessary to ensure that this board is strategically positioned to produce a compelling sunset review submission and the coming legislative oversight hearings. My professional competencies, inherent strategic strengths, and proven leadership will benefit this board by ensuring that we are all aligned and ready to pass the scrutiny that we will soon be placed under. It's for these reasons that I am running for board president. Sunset review and legislative oversight is not a simple process. boards that face scrutiny have often failed and disbanded. Our actions, administration, policies, and decisions will all be reviewed. Other parties besides licensees and the general public, such as public interest groups, ophthalmologists, RDOs, the general public, and even the legislature itself, will have the right to opine whether this is an effective consumer protection board. We will have to be prepared to answer any question that is leveled our way. The strategic plan will closely be examined during the sunset review. The decisions we make, especially those regarding the North Carolina case, must show that we have direction and purpose in protecting the public. My experience soliciting input from stakeholders and synthesizing ideas into a well-written document will come to fruition. I've been involved in similar processes for 25 years, with experience gained through mergers and acquisitions, risk management, and a strong understanding of market entry barriers. With respect to the RDO Advisory Committee, first, we will not be successful without obtaining the necessary resources. This will require extensive negotiations with DCA, the Department of Finance, the legislature, and even the governor. I've negotiated complex strategic alliances to achieve desired goals. Second, we must have a committee that actually works. I've experienced assembling interdependent teams from scratch, helping them to reach their full potential and evolve into meaningful contributors. As an advocate for the board, I advance solutions. I served as the co-lead of the selection committee for the new executive officer. Then I initiated bi-monthly or weekly calls with the EO to discuss operational issues, offer strategic counsel, and even mentorship. I drafted the application for membership to launch the RDO Advisory Committee, and I'm now working with the state on a progressive outreach approach to collect applicants and increase our pool. As vice president, I participated in key legislative briefings hosted by DCA, so we better understand the impact of the legislation on this particular board. I'm an active member on the committees for the board. Aside from the RDO Advisory Committee application, I conceptualized and worked with board staff on practice and education score sheet, while also writing the sunset review introduction, providing comments and on the draft, and strategizing each section's key attributes with the executive officer. I've actively sought out and met with optometry students to set a strong foundation for the relationship they will have with this board long after we are all retired. Going forward, I would like to suggest a board message on our public website that provides the public with a status report during non-meeting months, offering a summary of accomplishment between these quarterly meetings. This would include committee updates and any other information that would further transparency and accountability. Publicly noticed executive committee meetings, perhaps a couple times a year, would enable a collaborative discussion by board leadership on such topics as meeting locations, logistics, and review of committee resources. I am committed to this board and to all of you as individual board members. There will not always be a unanimous vote, but I will make sure that everyone, including the public and the licensees, are heard and their opinions matter. We all have our own expertise and unique capabilities. And as president, I will work to blend all of these as we partner together in the months ahead. Thank you.
With that, I turn over to Dr. Chawla for any candidate statements.
I just have a brief statement. I submitted a candidate statement with qualifications and experience that I've had on this board. I've been here for 4.5, almost 5 years, and I've contributed to every committee that's been on the board in different aspects. When I was a new board member, then as vice president, and then as president, I participated in the previous sunset report. I helped with the EO selection committee, and then the rest of the qualifications you see on the candidate statement that's before you. So my vision is for a unified board to work together and just move us forward in the direction of just providing the best patient care that we can for the people who live the state of California.
With that, I ask if any members of the board have any questions for either of the candidates.
I have a question. We have a lot on our plate. There's a lot going on with the Sunset Review. There's, who knows what the legislative package will be. You know, especially Sunset Review, unfortunately, I've yet to have the legislative calendar accommodate my schedule. So you have to be willing to drop things at a moment's notice if they decide to have a committee hearing. Can you both commit to that time commitment to where you can be there to represent us as chair? Because I think particularly through the Sunset Review, because part of it too is as we try to move some of these issues forward, children's vision, mobile clinic, whatever, you know, politics is 90% perception and it's 90% showing up and it's being at the table and it's making that commitment to be there, which means, you know, at the last minute having to drop your plans, and you're both very busy women. How are you going to handle that?
I'm happy to answer that first. Travel is easy for me. I have a grab-and-go bag, and the job that I have enables me to work from any location, and it just so happens in Sacramento we have an office. But irrespective, if I knew I had to be somewhere for a period of time, I would just stay up there for that period of time and do whatever obligations I had while I was waiting to be called into a meeting with the legislature. I would be using it to do other things as well. But I have the flexibility.
I have flexibility also as a different role has come into play for me at my current job. There's a lot more flexibility and opportunity to be present. I'm committed to that.
Are there any more questions from the board members?
One question for Sid. In your current term, is this your last term on this board? And how many years do you have left in this term?
This is my first term.
Okay.
And I still have until November, next November, and then it re-ups. And if I understand correctly from the EO, we're going to get back on track with elections in April so that the new officers would take their positions in the July 1st timeframe. So that's well before the end of my term, of my first term.
And your first term, right? And then Dr. Chawla, you've served as president for one term so far, so that means 1 year, right?
Have we ever had a public member as chair of this board?
So we did have staff research to see if we would ever had a public member as chair, and I don't believe, from what we could find, there was a period of time of records that were missing, but from what we've been able to determine, there hasn't been a public chair. That's correct, right?
So I would kind of actually say one thing. I don't think it matters if you're an optometrist or not. I think you select based on leadership, because as we've said ad nauseum at this meeting and others, we're all here for the same reason. It's just you have a different subject that you're an expert on. So I don't think it matters whether we've had one or not.
I mean, I agree. I just, you know, since my time on the board when I first got here, you know, I studied the history of the board. You had presidents for 8 years.
They never re-elected, you know.
You
that was the
had,
thing, so.
you know, and it's, I work with other boards, you know, dental board has elected public, it says something, I think, when these disciplinary boards look at having that we're here to protect the public. And there has always been a little bit of a stress between licensees and public members. And I'm seeing a trend on other boards that you're seeing more public members. And partly I give that credit to Governor Brown and his administration, because they've made it a priority to appoint strong people to the board. We've all, most of us with the exception of 2, who were appointed through the Assembly or the Senate, were vetted by the governor and the staff. And I know for him it's very much about public service. And I just, I'm a change person. I believe in change. I believe in looking at things from a different perspective. I've had the opportunity to work with Sid on projects outside of this board, and her strategic thinking and her leadership. It might be interesting to see what this board could do should we have someone else leading. So I just ask. I think you both are very qualified, but I do like what Dr. Turetsky had put in his comments about maybe trying to have a public member serving as our chair.
I'm going to make a comment. I've been on the board about 4.5, 5 years. And up until Dr. Chala's leadership, I would have fought very hard for having a public member, because my sense was there was a division. But under Dr. Chala's leadership, the statement that was made earlier about everyone is a member of the public, you've lived that. I don't see that separation anymore. You've done a great job.
There are no additional comments prior to taking a vote. I'd like to give the public an opportunity to provide any comment.
I'd like to make a comment.
Oh, sorry.
I thought we were asking questions.
Oh.
This is going to be a very, very difficult decision for me, because both Dr. Chala and Ms. Brandwein have served this board immeasurably. And from what I can tell, Dr. Chala has improved the board in her 1 year here. And I have some misgivings about changing the chair after only 1 year. So I'm weighing that with, it would be nice to have a public member. Sid's done a tremendous job as member and vice president, and she continue to do that as president. So that's what's rattling around my brain right now.
All right, I'll say something. Okay. So, and I will echo Mark's comments that, I mean, I have absolutely nothing but praise for the way things have been run for the last year. My overriding concern is public perception. And that's why I really think that a member of the public should be leading the board. I think that all the board's officers should be public members. I was nominated for board secretary last year. I declined the nomination and deferred to Rachel, because I do believe that I think the optics are important, North Carolina aside, because it really doesn't matter. It's still going to be a majority of professionals on the board. It still looks better, I think, when people can't say, oh, well, they're in the hands of the COA, or he works for, whatever organization. If it's a public member, it's somebody that's looking out for the benefit of the public, and that's the position that I see. So that's my rationale for nominating Sid.
With that, I turn it over to the public for any comments.
I'd like to make a comment. As an optician, and I am going to follow right behind Dr. T here, perception is important. A part of me wanting to be involved in the group and sitting here and listening and kind of seeing where I've been on several boards before too. Being a public member is just one of those things where you want to make sure that, as an optician, it was always my concern when you guys took over the licensing from the medical board, which is why I'm kind of like, okay, hang on, this is optometrists for optometrists. That's how my perception of the board has always been. And I've been doing this for about 25 years, so I've never really paid much attention to you guys because it's always been that way. It's just, my perception was optometrist for optometrists. So when I was recognized that you guys had taken it over in January for the RDOs and the licensing, it just kind of brought up my little Scooby ears and going, wait, you know, how did this happen? When did this happen? Why did this happen? But now I understand, and I see that, and I think having public representation is very important, and the perception is out there. You know, a lot of boards don't really recognize what's going on around them, or, you know, they don't get a lot of feedback because a lot of the public just says, oh, it's a board, they're just gonna do what they're gonna do and there's not gonna be any input. And I think it would be nice, you know, to know that, well, I think it's nice to know that you guys are balancing your guys' selves in the long run, and I think you're gonna get more participation in the public if there's a little bit more output out there for the public to know about it. So I think you guys are doing a good job. Since I've been sitting here, you know, I'm kind of like impressed.
Just kind of.
There's still room for improvement.
With that, I would like to do a roll call vote, and since we have two options, I urge all of the board members to vote because it should be a board decision. While everyone has the right to abstain, I do highly encourage everyone to vote. With that, I will call you by name, and if you can say who you are nominating, then I will take it in for the minutes.
I'm leaving.
You're nominating or voting?
I'm sorry, for your voting for. Okay, so Mark Morgoni,
To be first.
I know.
Dr. Chawla.
Dr. McIntyre,
Dr. Chawla.
Rachel,
Sid Brandvine.
Dr. Wong,
Dr. Chawla.
Dr. Tretzky,
Sid Brandwein?
Dr. Chawla, Dr. Kawaguchi,
Dr. Chawla.
Ruby,
Sid.
Sid, Donna,
Dr. Chawla.
Maria Sperber,
Sid.
we have 6 for Dr. Chawla and 5 for Sid. So congratulations, Dr. Chawla, on another term as president.
Congratulations.
So board members, with that, I would like to turn it over to nominations for secretary. We do not have any current nominations, so I'm sorry, for vice president. Secretary is next, vice president. So I would accept nominations from the floor at this time.
I'd like to nominate Sid Brandwein.
Thank you, I decline.
Are there any other nominations for vice president?
I will nominate, since she's been an officer, Rachel Michelin for the office of Vice President.
I decline. I don't have the time.
Are there any additional nominations for vice president?
I'll nominate Donna Burke. I'll accept.
Are there any additional nominations for vice president? With that, before taking any vote, I would like to give the nominated candidate a chance to make any comments.
Well, I've been on the board for about 4.5 to 5 years. I've served as secretary. I have served on a number of committees. I'm based in Sacramento, so should there be difficulty with the president making it to the Sacramento area, I wouldn't have any difficulty doing so, and I'd be happy to serve.
With that, I'd like to allow the board members a chance to have any questions or make any comments. Seeing none, I'd like to turn it over to the public for any comments. All right, so as we have one candidate, I'd like your vote either in support or not, so an aye or a no vote, and I'll go down by roll. So Mark Mordoni,
Yes.
Dr. McIntyre,
Yes.
Rachel,
Yes.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Dr. Tretzky,
Yes.
Dr. Chawla,
Yes.
Dr. Kawaguchi,
Aye.
Ruby,
Yes.
Sid,
Aye.
Donna,
Aye.
Maria.
Aye.
Congratulations, Donna, on your nomination and your election to vice president.
Thank you.
With that, members, I'd like to open it up for nominations for secretary. We have not received any thus far. Are there any nominations for board secretary?
So, I don't nominate anybody.
I'll nominate Dr. Wong.
So we have a nomination on the floor for Dr. Wong. Dr. Wong, do you accept that nomination?
I do.
Okay. Are there any additional nominations for secretary? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to provide Dr. Wong a chance to make any candidate statements.
Well, I've only been on the board for a year and a half. It's been a very eye-opening experience, and I look forward to having another year of interesting experiences and learning more about the board, and I'm very happy to serve.
With that, I'd like to open it up to the board members for any additional questions or comments to the candidate. Seeing none, I'd like to open up to the public for any comments. Okay, much like the vice president, we had one nomination, so I would request either your yes or your no vote. Starting with with Mark Mordomi.
Dr. Mordomi votes yes.
Dr. McIntyre.
Yes.
Yes.
Rachel. Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Tretz.
Yes.
Dr. Chawla.
Yes.
Dr. Kawaguchi.
Yes.
Rumi.
Yes.
Sid.
Yes.
Donna.
Yes.
Maria.
Yes.
All right, congratulations, Dr. Wong, on your election to secretary. Vice secretary.
Vice secretary.
To the secretary.
Secretary.
For the official pen.
I know. Here you go.
Pen has passed.
So we move to agenda item 18, which is future agenda items. There are already a list here, and I think some people had some suggestions. I'll just go down the road, Mark, any suggestions?
No.
Dr. McIntyre?
No.
Rachel?
I have a couple. We had expressed interest in looking into the establishment of a advanced optometry, doctor of optometry degree for foreign graduates. And so I got in touch with some of the optometry schools per the president, and I think we should just discuss that at the next meeting. I also had a request from several people to, if we would reevaluate the law exam and the number of times that it's being offered currently. Because right now it's only being offered once every 6 months. That's all.
For clarification purposes, the law exam is always offered. It's just after, if you do not pass the first time, they have to wait 180 days before they begin.
So someone
But we can-
requested that we look at that again. Sorry.
Actually, I thought of one. What's the status of the board manual that's been?
Administrative handbook.
Administrative handbook.
So the board did make some changes, and then shortly thereafter, the law was changed, and so the board had directed authority to me to work with legal counsel to make non-substantive changes to it. So we were revising it to reflect all of the changes in law with the RDO program. So we made those changes, we sent it to legal for review, we received those changes, and then now it's going to be submitted back to legal this week.
So will we have it at the next board meeting?
Absolutely.
'Cause that's been what, I've never seen one since I've gotten appointed.
I started working on it 2 years ago next month with him.
So would you like that as a future agenda item? Or was that
I
just a
think
question?
so, because I like it to be agendized, so we actually
Vote on it.
vote on it and get it going.
Well, so the board has made approval, and it didn't have to come back to the board as long as we weren't making any substantive changes.
So then, does that mean you can email it out even as soon as it's done?
Correct. Yes.
But will that be prior to the November board meeting?
Yes.
I think there needs to be a hard deadline on it.
What would you like that to be?
Next week would be good, but,
September 1st.
yeah, I mean, I mean, I just, yeah, it needs to be, I think it needs to, I mean, we need board members. I've never seen it.
September 15th, okay?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
One item. The last what am I saying? The last conference call that we had to be canceled because a board member couldn't be at his or her location. Can we put a guideline in place that locations must or should be staffed by at least 2 board members? So if somebody can't make it, that doesn't suddenly cancel the meeting, or there's a backup to that person being there?
So we can agenda.
Just something to bounce around on that so we don't waste time if we have to have a quick meeting. That's all I have.
I'm assuming that it would be under legislative, but I just want to make sure that children's vision is included in that.
I think this may go under the dispensing optician committee once they're formed, but talking about required continuing education credits for opticians. I'm wondering if that would be an item to discuss, or should it be left to that committee to talk about? Because there is a lot of work that needs to be discussed about it. It's going to take time. So if we can do that, the continuing education credits for opticians would be great.
Nothing. My suggestion mirrors what Dr. Turetsky suggested, except can we explore having the emergency meetings open to the public by teleconference or by telecast?
We can, so
Yes.
the special.
That way we
meeting-
won't run into the issue.
Then why haven't we done that?
Wait. There are boards who are doing it. It's very costly. Board, we can research it and bring it back to see if that's something that the board wants to do.
Okay, why was that never brought before us before
Because we were told
as
we
an
couldn't do it.
option?
No, we've discussed this before, and we were told we couldn't do it. We'll let you, came from Mona.
Okay.
I just clearly recall this conversation, so
So
research
the
it.
question is, those 2-day meetings are 48-hour special meetings that we talk about.
Right, yeah.
To consider proposed legislation, the question is, can we teleconference them?
Right.
Okay, understand.
Because if you have one call-in number,
They
then
should be able to
everyone
use
that
that
calls
number And then
in,
use the
Right.
public site to get their
Yeah.
information.
Well, and that way we don't have to move
Yeah.
locations.
Right.
and-
you can even have people online submit questions.
So I have a.
Through
I have a
Twitter,
additional
through,
question to
you
that.
know.
That's the case, can we also have it for board members or teleconference without notifying the site?
No.
No, all right.
Well, the teleconference.
Good shot.
So just so you know, coming from the medical board when I left was running the concept. We don't, right now we have webcasting or teleconferencing. We don't have bi-directional capability, which are people like on the phone can call in or, type messages, and that's something that the board could explore if they wanted to. Right now, this board doesn't have that capacity, so we can jump up and do that. My preliminary thoughts were, and I know we're just on future items, at this point, I can't see any legal block to having the special 48-hour meetings teleconference, except that, of course, notwithstanding what Dr. Kawaguchi suggested, every satellite location has got to be noticed. So
Or
that's-
board members have.
For board members,
Yeah.
correct. But, I'll give you something more formal for next time.
So the medical board uses a pretty effective service where members of the public are able to call in, and there's certain portions of the meeting where they're able to participate during the public comment portion of it. So it is available. We can research how we can get that going.
But does that solve the problem of being noticed? Do board members still have to be noticed? at a
Yes.
Board members do.
Yes.
So the
that
board
doesn't
members, it
solve the
doesn't solve the
problem.
problem. Because if a
It
board
just
member-
allows greater access to the public because you don't have to go to one of the teleconference sites.
Right, but if a board member is still important, then you still have to.
So could you do though, if you had locations where you rotated and at least the public could have access to a location where 2 board members were, and then other board members weren't, that, do we all have to be at a notice? If everyone can call in to a call, do we all have to be noticed somewhere
Yes, yes.
That's what.
according? And that's under the Bagley Keene Act?
Correct. Correct. You can certainly notice members, not to get off track, but you can certainly, you could have auxiliary sites where no member is present, as long as you say in the notice, no member present, this is just merely a participative access or listening site. But when you designate that a board member is going to be there, then the board member has to
No,
be.
you're not, so my
But if we
question
did,
is,
like,
yeah, so my
teleconference, we
question,
wouldn't have to.
yeah, but my question is if Don and I decide we're in the Sacramento office.
Right.
And, you know, Dr. Chal and Calgary, they're the LA off, but not every board member is at every location, but at least the public could have access to board members and also get on a call with all the board members are on there. Do we all have to be at a notice
As
location?
long as one of, like, so if Donna can't make it, but you're still there,
Right.
it's fine.
But what if I am not there, but I want to call in from, because I'm in San Francisco?
No. Now, wherever the board member is participating from, that location has to be the gamut, noticed, ADA accessible, compliant, authorized with signage.
So the first part of the idea is a good one where there's two people, but for you to, because we've had this problem before. where people-
We'll research it.
I think that's what it was.
It really, because all that we're trying to do is make it available for the public to show up and it was available to all of them.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
But now with new technology, it might be,
You could FaceTime.
it's just an antiquated way of holding the meeting now.
It's one of those common cases where the law hasn't kind of.
Yes, exactly.
So that's what we need to do.
Madam Vice President, is that what you're telling us now?
Is there any other suggestions for topics?
Good try, Don.
All right, so you have a laundry list.
I do. Are there any others? Maria? No? Okay.
Well, do we need to still bring up your agenda items, Donna, since it's not really what, on the calling in? Or do you want to?
We can still research.
Mine is explained.
Just a last question. We had talked about having a representative of the NBEO come to discuss the issues they were having with testing
Yes.
nationwide. Well, nationwide, but also in the state of California.
Yeah, and they did want to participate in this meeting. Unfortunately, they had conflicting schedules. So they do say that I have reached out to them again, and they are available for November.
Any other topics? So I was told that last night people were betting on 4:05 as the end time. A little early.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry. So,
All right, my clock says 4:05.
okay. So the last agenda item is adjournment. If there are no objections, we will adjourn. Thank you.